Welcome to Deep Macro's podcast, The Future of Finance. I'm Jeff Young, the CEO of Deep Macro, and with me today is Emily Parker. Emily is the Executive Director of Global Content at CoinDesk, where she leads CoinDesk global expansion, anchors CoinDesk TV flagship show, First Mover, and analyzes crypto developments worldwide. She recently spent some time in Japan and wrote a really interesting long article titled Japan Embraces Web3 as Global Regulators Grow Wary of Crypto. And I've asked her to talk about this article on our podcast. So anyway, thank you, Emily, for appearing.
Thank you for having me.
And first off, I just wanted to know, most of our followers would not naturally think of Japan as the place to go on crypto. So what got you interested in looking at crypto in Japan in the first place?
Sure. So I actually have a very long history with Japan. I've been involved with Japan pretty much since after college. And I've been involved with Japan crypto for a few years as well. So it's good to have a little bit of context here. So actually, Japan was a really early mover on crypto. And before, go back a few years, you look at around late 2017, China cracked down on cryptocurrency, cracked down on ICOs, cracked down on cryptocurrency trade. At that time, Japan and Korea actually were poised to sort of be the crypto capitals of Asia, if not the world. But that was a very short window because that was sort of late 2017. And then early 2018, CoinCheck, which is a big Japanese exchange, got hacked. At the time, it was the biggest hack in crypto history. So that's when Japan really started to tighten on crypto and became very strict on regulation. But before that, I think there was this idea that Japan was going to become really become a crypto capital for various reasons. Japan is obviously a very tech savvy nation. There's always been a lot of retail trade in Japan. So I think, people really thought it was going to be a huge player. And then 2018, there was this hack, regulators got really spooked, and activity kind of stopped for a while. And I was in Japan at that time. I was spending a lot of time in Asia or in those years. And I remember it was really hard to do anything in crypto after the CoinCheck hack. And there was sort of this, it felt like, okay, this is over. It turns out, though, that it wasn't over. It's just that Japanese regulators were sort of taking the time to get things in order. So for me, I've kind of been just waiting, waiting for Japan to come back, waiting for Japan to become the crypto story that I thought it had the potential to be. And now I think we're starting to see that a little bit.
Okay, that's interesting history. Then, you were there for an extended period of time recently. Could you summarize your major findings?
Sure. So, okay. So I think that the biggest takeaway here is FTX, right? So now I'm based in the United States, and as we know, just if you look at the rhetoric that you hear in the US, for example, in Congress, just lawmakers, the government, there definitely is a lot of wariness of crypto right now in the US. Now, this has been going on for a while because obviously it didn't start with FTX. There was Terra Luna, and then there was Celsius, and there's been a sort of a string of very high-profile implosions. So you have kind of lawmakers, regulators in the U.S. really kind of describing crypto in terms of investor protection. How do we prevent the next disaster? It's just not a very positive vibe here in the United States, right? And I think that's true in a lot of places, not everywhere. And again, not just because of FTX. We've had sort of a year of a lot of drama in crypto, but you see some of that rhetoric in Europe. You see even Singapore, which has always been, not always, but has been generally known as a fairly crypto-friendly jurisdiction. Recently, they've been starting to express some concern about retail trade. China, as we know, is not very friendly at all. So, Japan really struck me as a huge outlier because, I went there, it wasn't that long after the whole FTX meltdown, and people just didn't seem very concerned about it at all. When I say people, I'm talking about people in sort of political circles, even regulatory circles. It just wasn't the same kind of feeling that you have in the US. And I think one of the reasons is that FTX Japan is actually, at least as far as we know, those users are most likely to get their money back. And that's very different from what we're seeing in other parts of the world. And one of the reasons for that is because of the Japanese regulations that were put in place to sort of protect customers. So I think Japan has sort of a little bit more of a calmer and more confident stance vis-a-vis the recent crypto crises. And so that was like the first thing I noticed. I thought that was extremely interesting. And the other thing I noticed is that, again, when a lot of different places now are talking about crypto, okay, how do we rein this in? How do we protect investors? How do we sort of prevent the next disaster? I felt like I was hearing a very different kind of language in Japan, which was more encouraging. It was more, how do we open up? How do we do new things? How do we make this kind of more of a priority? So it just felt very out of sync with a lot of what I've been hearing from other parts of the world.
Oh, that's interesting. On the FTX issue, you mentioned, and others have also said that the withdrawals could actually happen as soon as next month, or at least
Mm-hmm.
start. Um, is there anything specific? You mentioned that it's better regulated, but is there anything
Yeah.
specific about the content of why they'd be able to get their money out where others
Yeah.
may not?
Yeah, it's very, very specific. So basically, it has to do with several provisions. One is, or very specific regulations. I think the most important one is a regulation that requires separation of assets. So basically, separating customer assets from exchange assets. As we know, one of the biggest problems with FTX was just all these, the intermingling of funds and assets getting mixed together and using one asset to do something that it wasn't supposed to do. In Japan, there are very strict rules about that for crypto exchanges specifically. So I'd say that's the biggest one. Another one that I think plays a role in this, for example, is you have to store assets in cold wallets. That's mostly to prevent hacking, but that's also kind of prevents just like assets from sort of disappearing. And then there's a whole kind of string of Japanese regulations, like audits, or actually even having to hold some customer assets in like a third party trust. So there's just like a lot of regulations in place that prevent exchanges from basically doing whatever they want with customer money, to put it simply. And that was a big problem with FTX.
Okay. I mean, that sounds positive as far as it goes. But you've also reported that some exchanges, such as Coinbase and Kraken, have actually left Japan. What were their main reasons, and does that sort of dampen our enthusiasm? Are there bigger lessons there?
Yeah, I'm really glad you asked that question. I think it's a really important point. Now, Coinbase and Kraken are two very specific examples. I mean, as we know, Coinbase has been having issues all over the world. There's been layoffs. So, Coinbase, their official explanation is market conditions, right? And I'm sure that that's a part of it, right? I mean, I don't think this is specifically about Japan only. I think Coinbase is dealing with a lot of market pressures all over the world. So that's definitely part of the story. I think the other parts of the story are, because Japan does have very strict regulations on exchanges, it can be hard to be profitable. I think that's part of it. And also, these are Coinbase is an overseas exchange, right? That was coming into a country where it didn't have a pre-existing user base. So that's going to be challenging as well. But I think even for other exchanges, even for the exchanges that are based in Japan, I mean, it's really challenging. I mean, exchanges will tell you that it is not easy to do business there because the regulations are really strict. And the impression that I had is that, and I guess this is, in some ways a good thing, but the regulations, they're not just like on paper. It's like they are really checking this, they are really checking to make sure that you have what you say you have, which is good. But I think, there are also some restrictions, for example, on like, you have to keep a certain amount of capital to hedge against risk. And the exchanges definitely can't act in the sort of Wild West way that some exchanges might be tempted to do. Now, again, some people would say this is good and this is necessary for the crypto industry. I think from the exchange perspective, I think there are some exchanges that might find those rules to be maybe overly stringent. So I think it's definitely a part of the story. And I think we're just going to kind of have to see going forward, if exchanges can thrive in this landscape.
Okay. Another element of the crypto landscape that you talked about in the article were DAOs, or distributed
Mm-hmm.
autonomous organizations. And I think that in general, they're not as well known as other blockchain applications like crypto coins and trade exchanges. So could you tell us a little about the thinking of regulators in Japan toward DAOs? And are there a lot of active ones in Japan, or is it even correct to think of a DAO as sort of in Japan or in any of the
Yeah.
location, given that they're supposed to be distributed and autonomous and hardly organized? So I know there's a lot in there, but if you could just comment on what you have found.
Yeah, so I think I just got the impression, and again, it's not exactly regulators. So in Japan, some of the people that are pushing crypto, it's like a small but very active group of politicians in the ruling LDP, Liberal Democratic Party, that are kind of pushing this. So it's kind of like a specific group of people. But what's interesting is like the thoughtfulness with which they're looking at things like DAOs and NFTs. I mean, they're really kind of trying to be very precise about it and be very thoughtful about it. So, for example, at the moment, there's no country that I know of that has like a formal DAO legislation. And, so there's actually now there's a proposal out there coming from the LDP Web3 project team, which is just sort of looking at a way to sort of protect DAO. So here, the idea here, I think what they're trying to do, and it's quite interesting, I think there's a handful of politicians who recognize DAOs as something that's just like a new innovation, a new way of doing business, a new incentive structure. And the question is, how do you introduce this in a way that people feel safe? Because it's new and because there's not really any rules around it yet, I think some people might be nervous about doing business in this structure. So one of the things, for example, is they're trying to basically bring DAOs into like an LLC structure. So they're like protected under LLC. So like the idea is that like if you're running a DAO and something bad happens and people, there's damage caused, in theory, you would want some sort of like LLC type shield that would limit your liability. So that's kind of the way that they're thinking. And I think that's really interesting. And with NFTs, it's similar. It's like, how do we create rules around NFTs, if it's about IP or whatever it is, that would make some, big companies or ordinary people more comfortable entering the space. I think that's how they're thinking. As for DAOs, I mean, I wouldn't say that there's like, I mean, I did hear about some smaller, kind of like regional examples and some DAO experiments, going on. But I think in general, like all over the world, we really have yet to see like, a lot of DAOs, reaching scale. And so I think this is another area where Japan is really trying to be a leader.
Right. Okay. A lot of what you've been talking about is that the regulatory approach is relatively well organized, thoughtful, and clear. So they've kind of set the table. Now the next step is, what does the private sector do? And I just wondered, how is the private sector reacting? I'm reminded of financial reforms in the past that looked great on paper, but they didn't spark a lot of activity. And so I wondered if you could comment on how the private sector is responding to this regulatory framework that looks pretty clear.
Yeah, I mean, I think you would probably know about that too, because it sounds like you're also involved with Japan. But my impression, at least anecdotally, is that there's a lot of interest, and I think that's a big part of the motivation. At least on the political side, I think they really want to bring some of these big companies into the crypto space. For example, bring some of these big companies into the NFT space and involve them more. And I think that's part of the motivation for getting some of this regulatory clarity around them. Again, anecdotally, I'm definitely hearing of crypto projects kind of looking at Japan with greater interest because again the regulatory environment is fairly clear, and this could be seen as like a sign of credibility, like, okay, you make it in Japan, you have that stamp of approval. I'm definitely starting to hear these stories. I do think there are some obstacles that remain. However, though, I mean, I still think that it's challenging for Japan to compete with Singapore still. And I think, recently there was a big tax revision that, it was a good step, but my understanding is that taxes still remain an obstacle, and that's still an issue. And again, as we said, the strictness kind of cuts both ways. For some, it's like good and it's seen as protection, but I think there are definitely probably some types of crypto projects that might find it to be a challenging environment to operate in. But I'm definitely hearing about a lot of projects looking at Japan with greater interest because, as in crypto, it's always sort of like jurisdictions are always constantly changing, right? And especially if, Singapore is sounding a little bit less friendly recently. I think a lot of people are very confounded by the United States. They find the United States very confusing and very complicated. And so, yeah, I mean, I think Japan really does have a shot.
Okay, good. And I think you're entirely right. And you've mentioned the different regimes in, say, Asia. Let's forget about the U.S. for the moment. But like, it does seem like there's there has been at least some almost competition. Singapore,
Mhm.
Hong Kong has made some proposals. Taiwan is coming up with
Sure.
something. Japan. I mean, is that the way that we're going? There's sort of a regulatory competition in order to attract this new business.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I mean, that's been true for a while. It's always been, and I think that's, I think Singapore sort of realized that early and really set itself apart. And one of the reasons why Singapore has been so successful is because, yes, they're considered very friendly, but they're also considered relatively clear. I mean, I think clarity is really important, right? I mean, I think because the problem is, here's the thing about crypto, right? Just because the regulations are unclear doesn't mean you can do whatever you want, right? What it means is that you just don't know if you're going to get caught or not, right? So that's what we have. You have these sort of situations which are known as sort of like regulation by enforcement, right? So it's just having unclear regulations. That's not the same thing as being like it's a free for all. It just means that like you could actually get in trouble without realizing it. So I think traditionally projects have been attracted to jurisdictions where they're like, okay, there's a clear set of guidelines. But yeah, I mean, I think Asia is really, really interesting. As you said, Hong Kong has recently been signaling too that they want to welcome back crypto, which is, relatively new. China has been cracking down for a while, but China is very unpredictable. I mean, who knows what China's stance will be? I mean, I think China is still a country to watch, right? You just don't know. I'm talking about mainland China. Like you just don't know, where they're going to go. And yeah, I mean, I think, Korea is always kind of shifting back and forth. So it's a really interesting, and I think Japan is aware of these dynamics and do want to sort of like position themselves as a leader within Asia, but not just within Asia, like within the world, right? I mean, I think, some of the work they're doing on stable coins, for example, could put them in the lead. I think they've really, for the people who know about it, I think the FTX Japan example has been really notable. I mean, it's really set them apart from other jurisdictions. So yeah, I think it is a bit of like a jurisdiction competition for sure.
Okay, and you mentioned stablecoins. Could you maybe explain what's happening there on the stablecoin front?
Yeah, and actually, just one other quick note about the jurisdiction thing. One thing that's interesting is that in Japan, there's this very well-known entrepreneur, Soto Watanabe, and he had left Japan for Singapore, and I think that caused quite a stir. And the reason was, a tax reason, and that's an example that is mentioned a lot. So they're definitely aware of this sort of competition, and they're definitely aware of this idea of like we don't want to lose talent to other places. Yeah. So for stablecoins. Stablecoins, again, there's so many things about Japan, I think, that people just in crypto aren't that aware of. So one of them is that stablecoins right now are basically not allowed in Japan. They're not allowed on Japanese exchanges, which is a really big deal considering how important stablecoins are in the crypto economy, that they're just kind of not in Japan, I think is really interesting. And I don't think a lot of people know that. But that's now set to change. So, starting basically in June, you can sort of like apply and you can kind of stablecoins now have like a path into Japan, which I think is really interesting. Of course, we don't know how that's going to go because for overseas stablecoins, for example, like Tether or USDC, the rules again are going to be very, very strict. So like whether or not these stablecoin players are going to want to comply is another question entirely. But I think a lot of ever since the sort of crash of UST, countries all over the world have been really nervous about stablecoins, and I think there's a feeling in a lot of places that this could be the next shoe to drop in crypto. Like if a major stablecoin explodes, like that would just be terrible. And so I think there's a like in the U.S. there's sort of various stablecoin proposals going around, but we're still kind of debating it, right? So this is another area where Japan already kind of has the regulations are already set. They'll take effect in June. So again, another place where they could be in a sort of position of leadership.
Okay, maybe we could just close with thoughts on what do you think either the politicians that are pushing this or the regulators that are trying to orchestrate and maybe get some competition going in. What are the major problems that they see that are left to address?
You mean in Japan specifically?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say so. Probably, I think this question. I think, my understanding is that there's still some tax obstacles. So that's another one that I think there's one was just revised, but there's still others that remain. Taxes, of course, are always going to be a big issue. So I think taxes are still there. And again, this question of like, where do you draw the line? I mean, I think from the exchange perspective, how do exchanges manage to be both compliant and profitable? I think is a challenge. I mean, that's obviously a challenge all over the world, but I think that's probably going to be a challenge in Japan specifically. But other than that, I mean, I think yeah, I mean, I think that's just the question. I mean, I think Japan, it went from people thinking that it was sort of overly strict, and now we're sort of seeing that, okay, maybe they were doing something right, like maybe this was good, but just kind of finding that balance between being careful but not going too far that it sort of stifles innovation. So I think that's probably the challenge going forward.
Okay, well, great. Emily, thank you very much for appearing. Really appreciate your comments, and look forward to your next dispatch from Japan or else somewhere else. It's really moving forward.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
The content is for informational purposes only. You should not construe any such information or other material as legal, tax, investment, financial, or other advice. Nothing contained in this material constitutes a solicitation, recommendation, endorsement, or offer by Deep Macro Incorporated or any third-party service provider to buy or sell any securities or other financial instruments in this or in any other jurisdiction in which such solicitation or offer would be unlawful under the securities laws of such jurisdiction. All content is information of a general nature and does not address the circumstances of any particular individual or entity. None of the information constitutes professional and/or financial advice, nor does any of the information constitute a comprehensive or complete statement of the matters discussed or the law relating thereto. There are risks associated with investing. Loss of principal is possible. Some high-risk investments may use leverage, which will accentuate gains and losses. A securities or a firm's past investment performance is not a guarantee or predictor of future investment performance.